Thank you to the RDA Steering Committee for inviting me to present about Australia's project to contextualise official RDA for the Australian library sector. I'm Aimee, National and State Libraries Australasia's Program Coordinator, and I am project managing this work. My presentation is going to be a high-level overview of the National and State Libraries Australasia official RDA project, where I'll give some information about the Australian context, background and overview of the work we're undertaking, and how we're making a nationwide project work. To add some context to our project, I need to give you some background about Australia. Our government structure is a federation, meaning power is constitutionally divided between a central federal government and the governments of our 6 states and 2 self-governing territories. Each of the states and territories operate individual libraries alongside the National Library of Australia, which is operated by the federal government. The state, territory and national libraries all operate with distinct governance and responsibilities. However, these libraries are the principal research and cultural institutions responsible for collecting, preserving and providing access to the documentary heritage of the communities they serve. Which brings me to National and State Libraries Australasia. Also known as NSLA or NSLA. NSLA is a collaboration between the national, state and territory libraries across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our collaboration includes 10 libraries spanning multiple time zones and has maintained active cooperation in various forms for over 50 years. Staff at NSLA member libraries generously contribute their time and expertise to projects and professional networks that develop new systems and services, facilitate research, create policies, and prepare submissions to government. These efforts benefit the library sectors and users throughout Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Among NSLA's key initiatives is leadership in addressing sector challenges, and a particularly notable project in this space is the National E-Deposit Service, or NED. NED addresses the legal deposit requirements across Australia and is a collaborative service responding to the major challenge of capturing and preserving our digital documentary history. The NED service provides for the deposit, management, storage, preservation, discovery, and delivery of published electronic materials across Australia. Additionally, NSLA continually fosters sector improvement through professional networks, discussions and roundtables that encourage shared learning and collaboration. This long-lasting partnership demonstrates our commitment to improving library services by working together across the Australasian region. The original idea for a collaborative approach to implementing official RDA in the Australian library sector began in 2023 with Michaela Goodwin and Julia Hickey from the National Library of Australia raising the possibility with the NSLA Heads of Collections Advisory Group. The National Library of New Zealand had already begun their own significant work towards implementing official RDA in Aotearoa, New Zealand, so this was an Australian-only project. The Heads of Collections, comprising the most senior staff responsible for library collections across the NSLA collaboration, agreed that a collaborative approach would be beneficial, as no single library organisation in Australia has the capacity or sector reach to complete this work and deliver outcomes that could be applied across the Australian library sector within the timeframe required. It was also seen as essential to contextualise official RDA for an Australian context, particularly regarding First Nations knowledge and material. Several Australian NSLA member libraries had begun exploring official RDA, but none had made substantial progress. One library estimated that to undertake this work would take a senior metadata staff member offline for a full year, so the Heads of Collections also saw the value in avoiding duplication by leveraging economy of scale and sharing the work across the Australian members of the NSLA collaboration. Additionally, the NSLA collaboration was an ideal group to undertake this project, as it meant we could leverage the metadata expertise and work already undertaken across Australian NSLA libraries. In March 2024, the NSLA board, which is made up of the chief executives of the NSLA libraries, requested a period of scoping work to be undertaken ahead of endorsing a collaborative NSLA approach. Melissa Parent undertook this scoping work on behalf of NSLA. In addition to having Melissa as the RDA scoping officer, NSLA also brought together a steering group comprising key stakeholders in the Australian library sector. These were the Australian Library and Information Association, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, the Council of Australasian University Librarians, and CAVAL. With regard to the scoping work, staff from most Australian libraries were contacted, either inviting them to take a web survey or with a request to participate in a 60-minute online consultation. The consultation also included representatives from library vendors and service providers, and the people that participated in the consultation were from various positions within their organisations, from managers to team leaders to cataloguers. The discussion centred around the use of original RDA within these organisations, as well as their sense of understanding around official RDA. These conversations reinforced Michaela and Julia's thinking when proposing a collaborative approach. The scoping work identified that for many organisations there was a strong appetite to implement official RDA, but they didn't have the resourcing to match. It was frequently referenced that the official RDA implementation in Australia would need to be inclusive, especially around First Nations materials. Most organisations worked with collection items by or about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and the official RDA guidance needed to ensure that Australian metadata practices met the needs of these special collection items. In summary, the consultation was valuable and confirmed that a collaborative approach was the way to go, that it must be inclusive and fit for the Australian context, and finally it appeared that it needed to have documentation to bring together the metadata application profiles and policy statements in a way that was relevant to a Mark 21 environment, as the Australian library sector overwhelmingly saw the cataloguing practice with a Mark lens. Using Australia's National eDeposit Service as a proven collaborative project, Melissa developed 3 possible models for the collaborative implementation of official RDA. First was the collaboration model, where non-NSLA organisations are full members of the steering and working groups and participate as equal partners. The second option was the consultation model, where project membership is focused on Australian NSLA libraries, and non-NSLA organisations and the broader Australian library sector are consulted at appropriate intervals. And finally, the connected model, where NSLA's Australian key partner organisations are members of the project, with non-NSLA organisations and the broader Australian library sector consulted at appropriate times. Regardless of the model selected, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies was to be a key partner in the project to ensure First Nations representation. As part of the scoping work, Melissa also costed the project and created a detailed project plan outlining the work to be undertaken, including estimated time commitments for project members. The scoping work was completed and presented to the NSLA board in November 2024. And at this point, I'd like to thank National Library of New Zealand for their generosity in sharing their time and learnings with us. It has absolutely informed the way we are undertaking our project. Ultimately, the NSLA board endorsed a project to create the minimum critical documentation required to contextualise official RDA for the Australian library and information sector. Noting that we don't have the time or resources to do an exhaustive review of official RDA, our goal is to provide baseline official RDA documentation that may be expanded upon outside of this project. The model chosen was the consultation model, involving participation primarily from Australian NSLA libraries, along with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies as a key partner, while engaging non-NSLA organisations at appropriate stages. This approach was chosen as the most efficient way to complete the project within the tight timeframe, as we could ensure ongoing participation from project group members, but I'll touch on this further in a moment. We've also implemented Melissa's project plan with some minor changes. The project includes a project manager, steering group, and 3 working groups. All of the Australian national, state, and territory libraries are participating in at least one group, with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies participating in both the steering group and one of the working groups. The original project plan proposed engaging a project manager for 1 day a week. However, the NSLA board decided to integrate the work into the NSLA office operations, believing this would provide greater flexibility. This approach has proven to be the right decision, as I work on the official RDA project most days. It's important to note that I'm not a metadata specialist, and while this means someone with subject matter expertise is not directly managing the project, the extensive metadata knowledge and experience of the steering and working group members, alongside Melissa Parent's project plan, ensure that this is not a disadvantage. The working groups are responsible for reviewing and contextualising official RDA. Decisions are intended to be made by consensus or by majority where consensus isn't possible, with the option to refer decisions to or ask for clarification from the official RDA steering group. The steering group also ensures that the project is on time and remaining within the project scope. I attend all the working group meetings and report back to the steering group and the NSLA board. As you can see, the three working groups are the Metadata Application Profile or MAP Working Group, who are responsible for creating our maps and identifying which entities will be included in our metadata application profiles. The Policy Statement Working Group are responsible for creating the policy statements that sit alongside the metadata application profiles, and the Workflows Working Group will bring together the metadata application profiles and policy statements and create guidance documentation. Each of the working groups have co-leads who work with me to guide the discussion and direct the work for each of the groups. Working groups meet weekly for an hour while the steering group meets monthly. The original project plan saw the working groups filled entirely by Australian NSLA library staff. However, it was later decided to extend an invitation to the Council of Australasian University Librarians to participate in the Policy Statement Working Group, as we felt the group needed more people given the amount of work to be undertaken. The Policy Statement Working Group currently includes a member from the University of Technology, Sydney. For this part of the project, the Metadata Application Profile and Policy Statement Working Groups are working concurrently with co-leads meeting fortnightly to provide updates, share information, and provide support and advice. The Workflows Working Group will be stood up in July 2026. The project is intended to run for 2 years until the end of 2026, and at this point we're mostly on track with our key dates. Our metadata application profiles are expected to be completed in November 2025, and although slightly delayed, this hasn't impacted the rest of the project. We're currently on track to have our policy statements completed by June 2026. And once both of these bodies of work are complete, we anticipate that in July 2026, we will share them with the Australian Library and Information educators so they have time to prepare and start training ahead of May 2027. It's important to note that our project only includes creating the official RDA documentation. Training in official RDA and the Australian documentation is out of scope for us. Our workflows and guidance documentation should be completed by December 2026, which will also see the conclusion of the project. And on to our working groups. We held our first metadata application profile working group meeting in February 2025, and from then until August, the group met weekly. The group has aimed to keep the metadata application profiles practical, as well as avoiding too much complexity and ensuring an RDA first approach, but with reference to Mark 21. When the MAP working group first met, they discussed what could be considered essential in the metadata application profiles, as well as how to work in a MARC environment while keeping RDA centered. After the group finished these foundational discussions, they started working on developing the metadata application profiles. Each group member was responsible for creating 1 or 2 metadata application profiles, with many working in pairs between the weekly MAP working group meetings. At the weekly meetings, group members would share their progress and raise any questions they had with the broader group. Once the initial metadata application profiles were created, they were tested by other people in the working group before the co-leads undertook a line-by-line review and standardized them in preparation for a sector consultation. In August this year, we invited members of the Australian library sector to participate in focus groups to test the draft application profiles. We ended up holding 2 separate focus groups, each meeting weekly across September. One focus group was for NSLA colleagues, with the other focus group comprising members from the rest of the library sector, including vendors and academic library staff. We wanted to ensure that participants outside of the NSLA collaboration had their own dedicated space to share their thoughts and feedback. The feedback provided was invaluable and is being used to inform the final metadata application profiles. You can see on screen a list of the metadata application profiles that have been created. The metadata application profile we're calling textual monograph was not included in the original MAP working group application profiles. However, this was identified in the focus groups as something to include. In addition to the resource metadata application profiles, we've also included authority application profiles that will be used to develop authorized access points and to create authority records. Initially, the MAP working group was unsure about including the timespan application profile, but ultimately this has been included in our metadata application profile documentation. As mentioned earlier, the metadata application profiles are expected to be completed later this month. The Policy Statement Working Group started a little after the Metadata Application Profiles Working Group and has been meeting weekly since March 2025. This group is taking a standards agnostic, RDA first approach with the intent that these can be mapped to different standards with little to no changes. Taking an RDA first approach was on the advice of Anushka Maguire from the National Library of New Zealand in a meeting with the Policy Statement Working Group co-leads at the start of the project. The National Library of New Zealand found that colleagues who were thinking in RDA first were better able to understand and apply the policy statements in their own cataloguing practice. While the metadata application profile and workflow working groups will be practically applying the policy statements in a MARC context, the policy statement working group's focus is to ensure that the policy statements are dynamic enough that they won't need changes if and when future standards are adopted, such as BibFrame. In addition to being standards agnostic, another key consideration is to ensure an Australian perspective, especially with relation to First Nations materials. This was reinforced early on when the group looked at policy statements for normalised transcription and diachronic works. When reviewing the condition options for elements, we've been using the National Library of New Zealand policy statements as a guide, as we have similar descriptive practices, and this is particularly so for First Nations descriptions. We also look towards the work undertaken by the British Library and the Library of Congress. As mentioned, the metadata application profile and policy statement working groups have been working concurrently. While the metadata application profiles working group developed the application profiles, the policy statement working group have been working through metadata guidance and entities such as data provenance and nomens and appellations. Each week, the co-leads nominate between 1 and 3 entities to focus on and include information about the conditions and condition options in a spreadsheet available on the group SharePoint. Before meeting, each of the group members work through the condition options and select whether to apply or not apply the condition option, and if needed can add thoughts, discussion points, or questions for clarification. At the meeting, the group works through the spreadsheet line by line to form a consensus and make a final decision. As I'm sure you can imagine, at times this work has included robust discussions, but the group has always reached agreement in the end. At times, the group has found it difficult to not think and mark. For example, when discussing a conditional option, the group will identify what it means in a practical context, and often these discussions turn back into how we work in MARC 21. As of November 2025, the Policy Statement Working Group has completed 29 policy statements. In January 2026, the Policy Statement Working Group is scheduled to divide into subgroups to increase our ability to work through the entities identified in the metadata application profiles. Each subgroup will be given the responsibility to create policy statements for related entities, with the subgroup leads meeting regularly to share updates or have further discussion with a wider group. Ahead of the split, and while the metadata application profiles are being finalised, the Policy Statement Working Group is creating policy statements for the common entities across the application profiles, for example, title proper and note on manifestation. This is to prevent duplication across the subgroups and allows the subgroups to focus on their own format-specific, unique, or less frequently occurring entities. Across their policy statement work, the Policy Statement Working Group has been identifying areas that may need to be covered in further guidance documentation. This will be handed over to the Workflows Working Group when it forms in the second half of 2026. I acknowledge that we're quite lucky regarding the context we're working in, and prior to this project, we had strong foundations in place that would make collaboration successful. While working with project members from all over Australia and across 5 different time zones is challenging, it's a challenge that NSLA libraries are familiar with. We have a long history of collaboration, and it's something we do regularly. For example, in addition to the NSLA board, NSLA has 7 networks and 4 advisory groups that meet quarterly with representatives from across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Additionally, the National e-Deposit Service is also a perfect example of NSLA libraries coming together to implement a significant nationwide project. The National e-Deposit Service also has a steering group and operational group that meet regularly with representatives from each of the Australian NSLA libraries. Because of this, we have well-established practices and applications that allow for collaboration from afar. With regard to the official RDA project, the consultation model was preferred in part because we had more ability to ensure the ongoing participation of project participants. The NSLA board, as I mentioned before, is made up of the chief executives for each of the NSLA member libraries, and with their endorsement of the project, we were able to confirm that their institution had committed to contributing resources to the project. When asking for nominations for working group members, we provided a terms of reference which included an estimate of the commitment required for a group member to set expectations and to allow for work planning within the individual libraries. We also made it clear that the expectation was for group members to be allowed time in their standard working day to dedicate to the official RDA project. We knew that if group members were participating in work time, we would have more chance of people remaining committed and completing the work, compared with volunteers and those participating in their own time. Group members were also endorsed by their managers to ensure that there was support for this work to be undertaken as part of the working group members' regular duties. Currently, the expectation of metadata application profile and policy statement working group members is about 2.5 hours a week, which includes 1 hour of meeting time and an hour and a half of offline work. The co-leads have an additional hour a week for co-lead catch-ups and preparing for meetings. We manage working across the distance by relying on Teams meetings, email groups, Teams chats, and SharePoint. The working groups have weekly meetings, and this regular communication keeps everyone focused and engaging with the project. We also understand that over a 2-year project, there will be changes in group members and resourcing. Australian NSLA member libraries aren't required to participate, and if a group member is no longer able to continue to contribute, their library is not required to replace them. In general, the importance of this work is understood, and there is interest in supporting and participating in the project. It's a testament to my colleagues on the steering and working groups that everyone has been working collaboratively and are fully engaged with the project. We understand the value of the work we are undertaking, and the group members are interested and passionate about metadata and about getting this right. At times there are disagreements in decision making, however these have all been managed through discussion and we reach a consensus or agreement in the end. Group members are encouraged to participate in discussion, and we foster an environment where everyone feels comfortable to contribute. This project also has built-in escalation points if disagreements are unable to be resolved, but so far we haven't needed to use them. So that's our project summary. With the metadata application profiles finalised this month, we're looking to ramp up the work on the policy statements. We're already preparing for the workflows working group to be stood up next year, and I'm also starting to consider options for the maintenance and updating of this work going forward, as this is not included in the current project. The scope for this project is to create the documentation. The responsibility for ongoing updates and maintenance will be addressed towards the end of the work. So that's a brief overview of the NSLA Official RDA project, and I hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions or would like more information, feel free to get in touch by sending an email to info@nsla.org.au. I monitor that email address, so they will come directly to me. To keep up to date with the project, you can visit the NSLA Official RDA page on our website, where we add quarterly updates. On that page, you can also sign up to join the mailing list, and we also share updates via the NSLA LinkedIn profile, so I suggest following there too. Thank you again for your time and for the invitation to share this project.